Mia Walters had always been a skeptic. As a journalist for the local newspaper, she had spent years covering every possible angle of human interest, from crime to politics, from heartwarming stories of recovery to tragic tales of loss. She had built a career on finding the truth, no matter how murky or elusive it seemed. But there was one story that lingered on the edges of her mind like a whisper she couldn't quite hear, a whisper she couldn't shake. It was about the train. Every night, just as the clock struck midnight, a strange train appeared on the tracks outside her apartment, running through the old, abandoned part of town. No one knew where it came from. No one knew where it went. It just appeared, a sleek, black silhouette, its headlights cutting through the fog like a ghost from another world. The train never stopped at any station. No one had ever seen the passengers. The thing was, no one seemed to care. It was just a fact of life in their small town. Mia had grown up hearing about the train, her mother warning her never to get too close, never to follow it. "That's the cursed train," her mother would say with a shiver, the kind of look in her eyes that only came when talking about things that went bump in the night. People who get on that train, they never come back the same. At first, Mia had dismissed it as superstition, the wild stories of small-town legends. After all, the world didn't work that way, did it? There had to be a logical explanation, a simple one. Maybe it was just a freight train that ran at odd hours, its route long forgotten by the people who lived near it. But even as she told herself this, there was a nagging sense that something wasn't right. Then came the night she decided to investigate. It had been a quiet evening, too quiet for her taste. No assignments to chase, no interviews to conduct. Mia had spent the night flipping through old stories, her mind wandering as the hours ticked by. It wasn't until midnight, just as the clock struck 12, that she heard it, the distant sound of a train whistle. She looked out the window, just in time to see the train's headlights piercing the fog, making its way down the forgotten tracks that ran parallel to the outskirts of town. Mia's heart skipped a beat. There it was again, the train. It was a constant, an anomaly she had grown accustomed to, yet never fully understood. Her curiosity flared. She grabbed her jacket and slipped out the door, her pulse quickening with every step as she moved toward the tracks. The night was cold, a chill that cut through her clothes as she walked through the empty streets. The train's whistle grew louder as she neared the tracks, and she could feel the vibrations under her feet. She approached the crossing, standing in the shadows, waiting for the train to pass. When it finally came into view, it was exactly as it always was, sleek, black, and imposing. The kind of train that belonged in another era, its design old-fashioned but elegant, as if it had been pulled out of a time long past. There were no advertisements, no logos, no markings of any kind. Just smooth, black steel. Mia's eyes narrowed as she watched it approach. She had never seen a train this late, not in all her years living here. The eerie silence around it struck her immediately. No horns blaring. No screeching of brakes. No sound at all, except for the soft thrum of the engine as it glided down the tracks, as if the train itself were part of the fog. The train passed right by her, its length stretching far beyond what she could see. She should have turned back then, gone home, and forgotten about it. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Something in the stillness of it all, the way it moved like a shadow, slipping silently through the night. And then she saw them. Through the window, just beyond the pale light of the train's interior, she could make out the faint silhouettes of people seated. Their faces were blurry, indistinct, but there was one thing that struck her immediately. They were all facing forward, staring ahead with the same blank expression. Mia's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just their silence that unnerved her, it was their stillness, their uniformity. There was no movement, no sign of life, not even the faintest shift in posture. It was like they were frozen. The train moved slowly past her, and for a moment, Mia could have sworn she saw one of the passengers glance at her. His face was pale, almost translucent in the dim light, and his eyes, wide and unblinking, locked with hers. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly looked away, her throat dry. She tried to steady her breath, but it was hard to ignore the sense of unease crawling up her spine. She told herself it was nothing, that she was simply imagining things. She was a journalist, after all. She had to be practical. She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, the sound of a voice, low, almost a whisper, floated to her ears. "Don't get on." It was barely audible, but it was clear enough that she heard it. Her eyes darted around the empty street, but there was no one there. No one except the train, still gliding silently through the fog. Mia stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The voice. The passenger's gaze. Everything about the situation felt wrong, like something had shifted, and she was now part of something she couldn't understand. But as the last car of the train disappeared into the night, she knew she couldn't walk away. Not yet. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her as she stood there, staring into the night where the train had disappeared. The air around her felt thick, charged, and she couldn't quite figure out whether it was from the unsettling experience or the biting cold that was now creeping into her bones. She quickly turned on her heel, eager to leave the tracks behind, but the voice, though faint, still lingered in her mind. "Don't get on." She couldn't make sense of it. Who had said that? Had one of the passengers spoken to her, or was it some figment of her imagination? A warning. The words echoed in her thoughts like a warning bell, but she couldn't fathom what it meant. Was it just a random comment from the eerie stillness of the train, or was there something more to it? She walked back toward her apartment, her steps quickening as she pushed the thought aside. Mia was a journalist, trained to observe, to gather facts, to uncover the truth behind the most bizarre situations. And this was a story, wasn't it? A strange train that appeared every night, running through an old, forgotten part of town, with passengers who didn't seem alive at all. The whole thing had the markings of something important. Something she couldn't ignore. The next day at work, Mia spent the morning scrolling through the archives of the local newspaper, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the train's mysterious appearance. But as expected, the story was thin. There were a few mentions from older articles, all more folklore than fact, and nothing concrete to go on. Her fingers tapped against the keyboard, frustration mounting. She couldn't just write about it and leave it at that. She needed to get closer to the truth. She had to understand why this train kept coming back, night after night, and why no one seemed to care about it except her. Mia sat back in her chair, staring out the window of her office. The fog from the previous night had cleared, but the unease hadn't left her. The voice, the blank expressions of the passengers, they were all gnawing at her, pulling her towards something she couldn't yet grasp. That night, she would follow it again. She told herself it was for the story. That was what journalists did, right? They investigated. They dug deeper into the mysteries that no one else cared about. But in truth, Mia was just as much driven by curiosity and fear. What if there was more to this train than anyone realized? What if the people, if you could even call them that, on board were trying to tell her something? By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Mia was ready. She grabbed her camera and notebook, the tools of her trade, and made her way out of the apartment. This time, she would follow the train. She wouldn't just stand by the tracks and watch it go by. She would get on it. As midnight approached, Mia stood at the edge of the tracks once again, her heart beating faster this time. The fog was thicker tonight, curling around her like a shroud. The train's whistle sounded in the distance, and she could feel it in her chest, the vibrations in the air, the sense that something was drawing closer. The headlights cut through the mist like a blade, and there it was again, the strange, black train, gliding silently down the tracks. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as it approached, the train moving slowly, methodically, as if it were a machine that had no need to rush. Mia's breath fogged in the cold air as she stepped closer, closer to the train. She could feel it now, the pull of it, the fascination and the dread twisting inside her like a knot. The train came to a stop just a few feet from where she stood. For a moment, everything was still. The train loomed before her, the doors closed, the windows dark and opaque. No sounds. No movement. Just silence. Her heart pounded. Mia took a deep breath, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. She hesitated, her mind screaming at her to turn back, but her body moved on its own, her fingers grasping the cold metal of the door. She swung it open. The interior of the train was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of old leather and something else, something faintly metallic. The train seemed to stretch infinitely inside, the rows of seats empty, save for the passengers. They were all there, sitting silently in their seats, their blank expressions locked forward. Mia's eyes scanned them quickly, her breath catching in her throat. There were at least a dozen of them, their faces pale and devoid of emotion, like mannequins frozen in time. Her stomach twisted. She stepped inside the train, the door clicking shut behind her with an unsettling finality. The moment the door closed, she could feel the change in the air, like the room had grown colder, heavier. Mia moved cautiously down the aisle, her footsteps muted by the thick carpet beneath her feet. She took a few tentative steps toward the nearest seat, and as she did, the passengers' eyes, all of them, shifted toward her. It was subtle, but unmistakable. They were looking at her. A chill ran down her spine. The blankness of their expressions made it worse, like they were waiting for her. Mia swallowed hard, her fingers clutching her camera tightly as she snapped a quick photo. She needed evidence, she told herself. She couldn't just turn around and leave without understanding what was happening here. She moved deeper into the train, her eyes scanning the faces. Each passenger had the same expression, but there was something off about them, something wrong. It wasn't their stillness that unnerved her. It was their silence. They weren't whispering, weren't even shifting in their seats. Just watching her. She passed a row of empty seats, and just as she reached the end of the car, something caught her eye. A figure, just a glimpse, moving at the far end of the train, beyond the shadows. It was a tall, thin man, standing alone in a dark corner. His face was indistinct, his features blurred, but Mia felt his presence, the weight of his gaze. He stepped forward. A sudden wave of panic gripped her. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she was rooted to the spot, her body frozen, heart hammering in her chest. And then, as if on cue, the passengers' eyes all shifted toward the door. Their blank expressions gave way to something else, a hint of awareness. A flicker of emotion. Mia felt a pull, like the train itself was moving, like it was alive. But it wasn't a normal train. It was something darker, something twisted. And just then, the man stepped forward, his pale eyes locking onto hers. His lips parted, and Mia caught a glimpse of something, a word, a warning. Leave. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as the figure, pale, thin, and towering, stepped closer. His face was indistinct, blurred by shadows, but his eyes pierced through the gloom like twin beacons of terror. She felt an icy cold grip her lungs, as though the very air in the train had thickened, become heavier, more suffocating. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The train, the passengers, the flickering lights, they were all caught in a strange, timeless limbo. All of them waiting. Watching. Mia's breath hitched as she slowly backed away, her legs feeling as though they were moving through thick mud. Her camera hung loosely from her neck, forgotten for a moment, her only focus on the man who had stepped into the aisle. Leave, he whispered again, his voice low, a rasping sound that barely reached her ears. But it was enough. The warning was clear. The man's lips were barely moving, and yet the words seemed to reverberate through the train, like an echo in her mind. Mia's feet moved instinctively, but her eyes remained locked on him. She could feel the pull, like the train itself was trying to draw her in. The same cold, eerie energy that had taken hold of her earlier now flooded her senses, and she knew that there was something here, something terrible waiting just beneath the surface. She glanced at the passengers again. They had not moved, not shifted a muscle. Their blank expressions still haunted her, but now, their eyes were no longer just empty. There was something more, recognition. A shared understanding. It was as if they knew what was happening, as if they had been trapped here for far longer than Mia could comprehend. "Why are you here?" she whispered to herself, her voice trembling as the train rumbled forward. She wasn't sure if she meant it as a question for the passengers or for herself. She had to know. She had to understand. She couldn't leave without the answers. The figure, the man, stepped closer, his presence almost overwhelming. He was taller than she had first thought, his body casting a long, impossible shadow across the aisle. His face was still hidden in the darkness, but Mia could feel the cold of his stare. She wanted to run, to flee from this place, but some force stronger than her own will, kept her in place. With a final, slow movement, the man extended his hand toward her. It was an open gesture, as if he were offering something, a choice. Mia froze. Her eyes flicked from his hand to the passengers. There was a flicker of something, fear, in their eyes now. She could see it in the way they were sitting. They weren't as silent as they seemed. They were trying to warn her, just like the man. But warn her of what? Her hand moved on its own, reaching for her camera, now heavy and clumsy around her neck. She snapped a quick photo, though she wasn't sure what she expected to see. The camera's flash illuminated the man's face for a brief second, and Mia's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't entirely human. The skin of his face was stretched too tight, almost translucent, revealing thin veins running like cracks beneath his skin. His eyes, those pale, soulless eyes, did not blink. They didn't move at all. His mouth was twisted into something between a smile and a grimace, and his teeth were too sharp, too white. Mia recoiled as a chill rushed over her, the coldness of the train seeping into her very bones. The man's lips parted again, but this time, there was no sound. Instead, an image flashed in Mia's mind, a vision. Like a series of stills from a nightmare. A train, speeding through the night, with people sitting in it, trapped. It was a distorted version of reality, where the world outside was a blur, a swirling mess of colors and shapes, none of it making sense. Mia's breath quickened as the vision became clearer. The passengers weren't alive. They were trapped here, just like the man. Their bodies were empty husks, preserved in some way, their souls lost to whatever fate awaited them. The train didn't just transport people, it kept them. "Leave," the man said once more, but this time, his voice was different, urgent. It was a warning now, not just to her, but to anyone who might get on the train. Her chest tightened, her pulse racing. She had made a mistake by getting on this train. She had broken some unseen rule, wandered too far into something she couldn't understand. And now, it was clear. The passengers, they were all dead. But worse than that, they weren't just dead, they were waiting. Waiting for something, for someone, to join them. Mia stumbled backward, her feet catching on the carpet, and she almost fell. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to escape this nightmare. She had to get off the train. But the door wouldn't open. She yanked on the handle, panic rising in her chest, but the door was locked. No sound of the mechanism. No resistance. It was as though the train itself had sealed her in. "Leave." The man's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a command. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She turned to face the passengers again, but this time, they weren't just staring blankly at her. Their eyes were wide, locked onto her, and the shift in their gaze was unmistakable. They weren't just trapped in this place. They were waiting for her. And then it hit her. The train didn't have a destination because it wasn't meant to go anywhere. The destination was already decided. This train, this cursed, spectral vessel, was a prison. And the passengers weren't just passengers. They were warnings. The man reached forward, his hand still extended, his voice now low and guttural. "You are the next one." Mia's stomach lurched. She could feel the air around her growing thicker, the walls of the train closing in. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the car, and the temperature dropped. It was as though the very atmosphere was beginning to change, to warp around her. The train wasn't just a mode of transportation, it was a trap. A trap for the souls of the lost, the souls of the people who had stepped onto this train, thinking they could leave, but never realizing that there was no escape. The man's face twisted into a grin, faint, twisted, almost imperceptible. And Mia realized the truth. She wasn't meant to be a journalist covering a story. She was the next passenger. And she was trapped.